Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakumullah khairan, Shaykh, for taking time. Inshallah, we'll be talking with the Shaykh a little bit about what's happening in the dawah scene and what's an obligation on a Muslim, and some of the best practices and advices from the Shaykh. MashaAllah, tabarakallah, he has been working with the converts, the reverts, the new Muslims for quite some time now, and has his own journey. May Allah bless him and keep him steadfast.
And you, may Allah bless you too.
Jazakumullah khair, Shaykh. So, Shaykh, I wanted to ask, in terms of a normal Muslim, 9 to 5 Muslim who's living in the West, going to school or university or just working, what is that an obligation for him or her to share some sort of message of Islam with the neighbors, colleagues, or people they interact with?
Okay. Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. So the first thing we have to understand is that da'wah as a whole, the majority of the scholars held that it is fardu kifaya. It's a collective obligation, which means that you need to have enough people doing the job so the job gets done. And if not, there aren't enough people doing that job so the job gets done, then everyone is sinful for it. And in that case, we have to say that the situation depends on where the person is and the kind of environment they're in. But the problem we have in the West, and indeed across the world, it can be that sometimes there's a situation that there is nobody else that can convey that except you. And that's why the scholars say that when there comes a situation where you're the only person that can convey that message, or you are one of the very few people that can convey that message, then that now becomes an individual obligation upon that person to do that and to spread that message. But before that, to do everything necessary to be able to spread that message. Because there's a nice principle we have in Islam, مَا لَا يَتِمُّ الْوَاجِبُ إِلَّا بِهِ فَهُوَ واجب. If there's something that you can't fulfill an obligation unless you do that thing, you have to do that. So in da'wah, we have to have the knowledge to be able to spread that. We have to give da'wah ala basira, with some knowledge and with insight. And so if a person's in a situation where they regularly find themselves to be the only person or one of the few people who can convey Islam to somebody, then that person needs to go and get the requirements to be able to go pass that knowledge on about Islam.
Inshallah. So does that mean that if I have a colleague or a neighbor who I know that is not being exposed to masjid or imam, what have you, and he just has a good rapport with me, does that kind of put it on my shoulders that I am the one to try to convey to him to the best of my ability? Or
certainly, I think it does. I think in those situations, it's often the case that if there's nobody you can hand that person over to, and you don't have someone you can say to that person, here we are, Muhammad, can you go talk to him about Islam? Then you find yourself that you're the one, and I think then it becomes incumbent on you to explain Islam to them in the best way that you can. And we want to really emphasize that whatever you say about Islam has to be upon knowledge. Now, we have to also emphasize that doesn't mean that you have to be a scholar or even a student of knowledge, but it means that whatever you say about Islam and the way that you convey Islam to people, it has to be done in the right way. The methodology by which you call people to Islam, because calling people to Islam is an ibadah. It's one of the greatest of the ibadat, of the acts of worship. And every act of worship, it has its methodology that you have to follow, the steps you have to go through, and it also has that essential knowledge of how to perform it. So just like you would pray however you want, you also can't give da'wah however you want. You have to follow the prophetic methodology in it. You have to learn how to convey, even if you only convey one thing, because we know that the Prophet ﷺ said, بَلِّغُ عَنِّي وَلَوْ آيَةً. Inform or transmit, convey the message from me. Even if it's only just one ayat. So even if a person only knows 1 or 2 ayat of the Quran, and they know the proper methodology of conveying Islam to someone, then that's sufficient for them, as long as they stick within their limits.
So now what we see is that happening is that we would have a lot of brothers or sisters interested in having intellectual dialogue and removing the doubts and conveying and convincing the people about the truth of Islam, and really convincing them that this is the path to success, the path to their Creator. And once a Shahadah happens, they typically get into a very passive mode, which they hand out some pamphlets or a book or a card of the masjid and tell them that all their sins are forgiven and send them their own way. So in that case, in that case, going back to the notion of your personal relationship with someone. So at that point, they are the only main contact or primary contact who has introduced them to Islam. Is that a good approach for them to say, okay, go to the masjid, and then they themselves moving on to the next non-Muslim to have a dialogue with?
I think this comes from a misconception. And I think the misconception is that the reward of the Shahadah is in getting the person to say La ilaha illallah. Now, if we look at the Prophet ﷺ, his job that he was sent with was to give dawah. That was his job. That was his job description, to call the people, to convey the message of Allah, to call the people to Islam. What we see is that he didn't suffice himself with getting the Shahada and then hand them over to Abu Bakr or hand them over to Umar and say, teach him how to pray and teach him. He was the one he conveyed the message of Islam, he called the people to accept it, and then he taught them what it is that they needed. And if I guess a lot of people who don't work in the field maybe, or who don't have such a deep understanding of the field, they kind of get the impression that everyone that they'll get the Shahada from, in 2 years' time, that person's going to be praying 5 times a day in the masjid. The reality is a huge percentage of those people will drift away from Islam, and some of them will even drift outside of Islam completely. And that's not going to count on the Day of Judgment the way that you want it to count. When you come and say, I got that person to say La ilaha illallah, but right now they're not standing next to me, and they're not standing among the group of the Muslims or among the group of the pious. So what we really want is we want people to understand that it's not just about the sales, not just about getting the sale, but it's about keeping that person, keeping that customer service, keeping that person in the religion and dedicated until, they're like a very small baby, until they can walk by themselves and until they've integrated with the community and settled within the community, and they've shown that they can do that with a degree of autonomy. They can just, they go into the prayers themselves, and they're learning themselves, and they're interacting with other Muslims themselves. Until you get them to that point, really you haven't taken a proper Shahada from them. And the evidence for this can be found in the statement of Allah Azza wa Jal, قالت الأعراب آمنا قل لم تؤمنوا ولكن قولوا أسلمنا ولما يدخل الإيمان في قلوبكم. The Bedouins said, a group of the Bedouins, they said, we believed. Just first day they became Muslims, said, we believed. Say, you have not believed, but you have become a Muslim. Iman hasn't yet entered into your heart. You haven't truly embraced the religion and all of its requirements. But what you've done is to say La ilaha illallah. So we want to take them from that level of the basic Islam to that level of real Iman, where they are really implementing and practicing the religion, and that takes more than just getting that Shahada. And the other thing is, of course, that getting a Shahada is relatively easier than accompanying that person on that long journey. It's certainly more, it's more gratifying. You get the instant reward, I got one, I got another one, I got another one. But it's more about, I got one and it took that person, however long it took, until that person really could walk on their own and could survive on their own. And that's what's really praiseworthy.
What about the mindset where somebody would say like, hey, look, if I get enough Shahadahs, some of them would be disciplined enough and proactive enough, and I'll get like one of them to practice. Is that a wise or smart or a Sunnah way of doing things?
It's not, and that's why, like we said, if we go back to how the Prophet ﷺ used to be, it wasn't about the numbers of how many people became Muslim, but about really, like having what we call the alim rabbani, the nurturing scholar who, really nurtures people and gets their hearts to connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Otherwise, we're not going to say that they're worthless, there's a reward in that, but we're going to say that the reward is significantly diminished as opposed to, and if you just think about the person who calls to good gets the reward of everyone who does it. So you imagine you've taught that person now how to pray, perhaps how to pronounce Arabic letters properly, perhaps you've taught them the basics of Iman. Now everything that they do, every single good deed, you're going to get a carbon copy of that good deed, inshallah. And you imagine that they go and give da'wah to 10 or 20 other people, and you're literally getting all of the rewards of all of the good deeds that person does. So subhanAllah, it's not about like, let me just go and get a room full and then one or two. The Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَتَبَ الْإِحْسَانَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ. Allah has made it an obligation to strive for excellence in everything you do. And getting a room full of people to say La ilaha illallah and then one of them to come to the masjid is not excellence, it's not ihsan. it's just, it's something, but it's not ihsan. So we want to strive for excellence, and we want to strive to really have people that genuinely embrace Islam in the real sense of the word, and not in the sense of the word that we say about them. Aslamtum, you've accepted Islam, walam tu'minu, but you haven't really believed in it.
That reminds me of the advice the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave to Mu'adh radiallahu anhu, that when they agree to the Tawheed, then you basically call them or tell them about the Salah. So you start worrying about that next step.
The next step. And he made Mu'adh responsible for that. That you're going to go and call them, and when they accept it from you, then teach them about the Salah and the Zakah, and you continue on, as the person who's going to teach them what they need until they become settled and they're able to access the rest of the Muslim community. And I guess when you're a new Muslim and you're just first in those stages of accepting Islam, people don't maybe realize how vulnerable you are. You feel very much like a stranger, very unsure of yourself. Even going to the masjid is a really, really big step. You feel very uncomfortable, a lot of people around, you're not sure what everyone's doing. So you need to take somebody beyond that point of La ilaha illallah to the point where they are able to access the Muslim community just like you would.
And another beautiful thing, Sheikh, Surah Abbas, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is prioritizing taking care of a companion over an influential non-Muslim.
For sure.
Right, so that really tells us where our focus should be.
That's a beautiful point.
Jazakumullah khair, Shaykh. I hope that serves as a good, beneficial and blessed reminders to all of us to take care of that, inshallah, and start focusing on how we can retain and develop the new Muslim, the person who's willing to take the Shahadah, where we start seeing the shaitan takes a proactive approach to them. Absolutely. And we take a passive approach towards them. Jazakumullah khair, Shaykh.
Wa iyyakum. Assalamu alaikum.